At my own law school graduation, the day I had bled and starved and worked myself half to death to reach, my parents did not stand to clap for me. They stood up in front of the entire auditorium and announced to everyone within earshot that I owed my younger brother an apartment. Not congratulations, not a single word of pride. They rose from their seats while my name still hung in the air, while I stood on that stage in my cap and gown, holding the diploma I had earned with 7 years of sacrifice. And the first thing out of my mother's mouth was that it was time for me to repay the family by signing my home over to my brother and his bride. I stood there under the bright lights, my own achievement turning to ash in my hands, and I realized that to the people who raised me, my success was never something to celebrate. It was only ever a resource to be harvested. I know how heavy a story like this is to hear, so before I go on, I want to ask you something. If you have ever poured yourself out for a family that treated your dreams as theirs to spend, do me a small kindness and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. When I read those words, I remember that the silence I lived in for so long is finally broken, and that there are people out there who understand exactly what this kind of betrayal feels like. You remind me I am not alone anymore. My name is Eleanor. I am 32 years old, and I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, a city of red brick row houses, old money, and families who treat loyalty like a debt you can never finish paying. I was raised to believe that the oldest child carries the family on her back, that a good daughter gives first and asks last, and that there is no sacrifice too large if it is made for blood. I believe those things with my whole heart. I built my entire young life around them, and it took me far too many years to understand that the people who preached family loyalty the loudest were the same people who never once intended to give any of it back to me. From the time I was a little girl, I wanted to be a lawyer. I do not mean I thought it sounded nice. I mean I read about it. I studied for it. I shaped my whole childhood around it. I wanted to stand in a courtroom and speak for people who could not speak for themselves. I graduated near the top of my high school class. I got into a good college on a partial scholarship, and I had every intention of going straight on to law school afterward. That was the plan. That was the dream I had carried since I was 9 years old. And then, in the spring of my final year of college, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table and quietly took that dream apart. My younger brother Trevor had been accepted to an expensive private university, a place with ivy on the walls and a price tag that made my father go pale. There was no scholarship. There were no savings. My parents had spent years living beyond their means to keep up appearances in our neighborhood, and there was simply no money for Trevor's tuition, so they turned to me. My mother held my hand across the table and told me how proud she was of how responsible I had always been. My father told me that Trevor was the only son, that a young man needed a strong start in the world, and that as the older sister, it was my duty to help. And then they made me a promise. They looked me in the eyes and they swore that if I would just put my own plans on hold and help get Trevor through school, then when he graduated, it would be my turn. They would help me through law school the same way. We just need a few years, my mother said. Family takes turns. When Trevor is done, we will be there for you. I want you to understand that I did not agree to this lightly, and I did not agree to it for nothing. I agreed because they made me a promise, and because I was young enough and trusting enough to believe that a promise from your own parents was as solid as stone. So I deferred my law school admission, and then I deferred it again, and eventually I let it lapse entirely because there was no time and no money to pursue it. I took the dream I had carried since childhood, and I folded it up and put it in a drawer, and I told myself it was only for a little while. What followed were 4 of the hardest years of my life. To help pay Trevor's tuition, I worked 3 jobs at once. I waited tables at a restaurant from 6 in the morning until the lunch rush ended. In the afternoons, I worked the front desk at a gym. And several nights a week, I drove for a rideshare company until 2 or 3 in the morning, then got up a few hours later to do it all again. I did this for 4 years. I missed birthdays and holidays. I lost friendships because I had no time for anyone. My back ached constantly. I developed an ulcer from the stress and the skipped meals, and every single month when Trevor's tuition came due, I sent the money. Over those 4 years, I personally paid more than $90,000 toward my brother's private university education. $90,000 earned one tip and one fare at a time. And here's the part I held on to without even knowing why at the time. I kept every record. Because I was sending the money from my own accounts, every transfer left a trail, every payment to the university bursar's office, every direct deposit I made into my parents' account when they handled the bill, all of it was documented in black and white, dated and labeled. I was a meticulous person by nature, the kind of person who keeps her receipts, and I had no idea that this habit would one day become the foundation of everything. I also still had, sitting in my phone, the text messages from my mother and father from all those years ago. The ones where they promised, in plain written words, that if I helped Trevor through school, it would be my turn next. When Trevor is done, we will help you with law school. That is a promise, Eleanor. We give you our word. I had screenshots of every one of those messages. I had saved them not out of suspicion, but out of sentiment, because at the time I thought they were proof of how much my family loved me. Trevor graduated 4 years later. I sat in the audience at his expensive private university, watching him walk across the stage in a gown I had paid for, and I cried, genuinely cried, because I was proud of him and because I thought my own turn had finally come. After the ceremony, I gently raised the subject with my parents. I said that I was ready now, that I wanted to apply to law school the way we had always planned. And my mother's face did something I will never forget. It went blank, then mildly annoyed, as though I had said something rude. She said that things were tight right now. She said that Trevor needed time to find his footing. She said we would talk about it later. Later never came. Every time I brought it up over the following year, there was a new reason, a new emergency, a new way that it simply was not the right time for me. The promise that had cost me 4 years and $90,000 was quietly, permanently set aside, as if it had never been made at all. Now, let me tell you about Trevor, because Trevor is the center of this story, even though he barely lifted a finger in his own life. Trevor was 26 by then, with a degree from a prestigious university that I had paid for, and he did absolutely nothing with it. He did not look for work. He told everyone the job market was beneath someone of his caliber. He moved back into our parents' house and spent his days sleeping until noon, playing video games, going out to bars at night, and waiting for the world to hand him the success he felt entitled to. And my parents, who had squeezed me dry to send him to school, treated his idleness as a charming phase. He is finding himself, my mother would say. He is a sensitive young man. The contrast was almost too cruel to believe. I had worked 3 jobs and ruined my health, and I was treated as the family workhorse. He had done nothing, and he was treated as a delicate prince. In spite of all of it, I refused to let my own life stall out forever. After the law school promise died, something in me hardened just enough to act. I took out student loans in my own name. I worked nights and weekends, and I applied to law school myself, with no help from my family, no celebration, no support. I got in, and over the next 3 years, I clawed my way through, exhausted and broke but determined, paying for it entirely on my own. During those same 3 years, I also managed something else. I saved, scraped, and stretched every dollar, and I bought myself a small 1-bedroom condominium in a modest part of the city. It was not much. It was tiny, with old appliances and thin walls. But it was mine. It was the first thing in my entire adult life that belonged to me alone, bought with money I earned, in my own name on the deed. I cannot describe to you what it meant to put my own key in my own door. After a decade of giving everything away, I finally had one small thing that was just mine. And that, of course, was exactly when my family decided they wanted it. About 6 months before my graduation, Trevor announced that he was getting married. He had met a young woman named Caitlin, whose family had real money and real social standing, the kind of family my parents had always wanted to impress. Suddenly, there was tremendous excitement in the house. There would be a grand engagement party, a beautiful wedding, the whole performance. And almost immediately, the conversation in my family turned, as it always did, to what I could provide. One evening, my mother called me and, in the sweetest possible voice, explained that Trevor and Caitlin would, of course, need a home to start their married life, and that it simply was not appropriate for a newlywed couple to live in my parents' house. And then she said the thing that I would hear echoed again and again in the weeks that followed. She said that I lived alone in my condominium, and that one person living alone in a whole apartment was such a waste of space. She said it would only make sense for me to give the condo to Trevor and Caitlin as their wedding home. After all, I was single, I had no family of my own, and what did I need a whole place to myself for? I was so stunned I almost laughed. I told her no, gently but clearly. I told her that this was my home, the only thing I had ever owned, bought entirely with my own money, and she grew cold and said we would discuss it as a family. I did not understand yet that with my family we will discuss it as a family never meant a discussion. It meant an ambush. The engagement party was held at a beautiful country club on a warm evening in late spring. Caitlin's family had spared no expense. There were string lights in the garden, a live band, white tablecloths, and perhaps 80 guests, all of them prominent and well-dressed. I came because I was Trevor's sister and I did not want to make a scene, and because some foolish part of me still wanted to be a good member of this family. I wore a nice dress. I brought a gift. I smiled and made conversation. And about an hour into the evening, as the band took a break and the room grew quiet, my father stepped up to the microphone and asked for everyone's attention. What happened next was choreographed. I understand that now. My father began to speak warmly about family and sacrifice and the importance of starting the next generation off right. And then he gestured for me to come forward. Confused, I walked toward him, and as I did, my mother appeared at my side and pressed a thick folder of documents into my hands. Trevor and Caitlin stood nearby, beaming. Caitlin's parents stood just behind them, watching me with cool, expectant faces. And my father announced into the microphone in front of all 80 guests that as a gift to the happy couple, his generous daughter Eleanor was going to sign over her condominium to her brother that very night. There was applause. People actually applauded, and I looked down at the folder in my hands and saw that it was a property transfer deed, already filled out, already prepared, with a line at the bottom waiting for my signature. My mother leaned close to me, her voice low but sharp enough for the front tables to hear, and she said that I should sign it right now and stop being selfish. She said that I was 32 years old and single, and that I did not need a whole apartment to myself. She said that a real family shares, and that Trevor was starting a true family while I was just a woman living alone, and that it only made sense for the home to go to the people who would fill it with children. Caitlin's mother chimed in with a tight smile, saying she had heard so much about how generous I was and how she just knew I would do the right thing for the young couple. The pressure in that room was suffocating. 80 pairs of eyes were on me, applauding, waiting, smiling, all of them certain that the dutiful older sister would simply sign her own home away rather than embarrass the family in public. And in that moment, standing under those pretty garden lights with a property deed shaking in my hands, something inside me finally broke open, and what poured out was not tears. It was clarity, cold and total. I thought about the 4 years I spent working 3 jobs until my body gave out. I thought about the $90,000. I thought about the dream I folded up and put away because they promised me my turn would come. I thought about how my turn never came, how it was never going to come, how it had never been real. I understood, all at once and forever, that in this family I was not a daughter and not a sister. I was a function. I was the one who paid. I had spent my whole life believing that if I just gave enough, they would finally love me the way they loved Trevor. And the truth was that they would take everything I had, down to the last brick of the only home I had ever owned, and they would never give me anything in return, because they did not see me as a person who could be owed. They only saw me as a person who could be used. The good, giving, hopeful daughter who stood in that audience died right there on the country club lawn. The woman who looked up from that deed was someone new. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not give them the public meltdown they had clearly staged this entire performance to extract. Instead, I straightened up, I looked at my father, and I spoke clearly enough for the whole garden to hear. I said no. I said that this condominium was my home, bought with my own money, and that I would not be signing anything tonight or ever. I said that I had already given this family more than they would ever deserve. And then I set the folder down on the nearest table. I picked up my purse, and I walked out of that party with my head high while 80 stunned guests watched me go. Behind me, I could hear my mother's voice rising into a furious wail and my father trying to smooth it over with the crowd. I did not look back. I drove straight home to my small condominium, the one they wanted to steal, and I sat on my own couch in my own living room, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel the full size of what had been done to me. And then I wiped my face, and I opened my laptop, and I started gathering everything, because here is what my family had forgotten. They had forgotten that the daughter they treated as a mindless workhorse had spent the last 3 years becoming a lawyer. The next morning, I went to see a former professor of mine, a sharp and seasoned attorney named Marcus Webb, who had mentored me through law school and had handled hundreds of contract and debt cases over his long career. I laid everything out on his desk. I showed him the 4 years of financial records, every transfer, every payment, more than $90,000 sent to fund my brother's education. And then I showed him the text messages, the screenshots from years earlier where my parents had promised, in their own written words, that if I funded Trevor's schooling, they would repay me by funding mine. When Trevor is done, we will help you with law school. That is a promise. We give you our word. Marcus read those messages very slowly, and then he looked up at me with an expression I had not expected. He was almost smiling. He told me something I had never let myself consider. He said that what my parents had described in those messages, and what I had relied upon to my detriment for years, looked an awful lot like an agreement. He explained that in many states, when one person provides money to another based on a clear promise of repayment or reciprocal benefit, and the other party breaks that promise, the money can be recovered as a debt. He said that $90,000 given on the strength of a written promise that was then broken was not a gift. It was a loan that had never been repaid. And he said that I had, without ever planning to, assembled nearly perfect evidence. The dated transfers proved the money. The text messages proved the promise. Their own refusal to honor my turn proved the breach. Eleanor, he said, you did not just survive this family. You documented them. I want to be honest about how I felt in that moment, because it was not simple joy. It was something heavier and quieter. For my entire life, I had been told that keeping score within a family was the ultimate sin, that love means never counting what you give. My father had said those exact words to me years ago, that family does not keep score, and I finally understood the cruelty buried inside that idea. They told me not to keep score precisely because they were the ones who always came out ahead. The rule against counting only ever benefited the people who took. So I decided, sitting in that office, that I was done playing by a rule designed to keep me poor and silent. I was going to count every single dollar. With Marcus representing me, I filed suit against my parents to recover the money I had paid for Trevor's education, treating it as exactly what it was, a debt incurred on a broken promise. The legal papers landed in my parents' mailbox about a week later, and the family erupted. My mother called me sobbing, then screaming, then sobbing again, accusing me of trying to destroy the family, of being a monster, of being a bitter and lonely woman who was jealous of her brother's happiness. My father left a cold message telling me to drop the lawsuit immediately before I humiliated everyone. Trevor sent a furious string of texts calling me selfish and pathetic. I did not respond to any of them directly. Instead, I forwarded every message to Marcus, because every threat and every guilt trip they sent only strengthened my case by showing the court exactly who these people were. And then I did one more thing, the thing that brought the whole house of cards down. For years, my family had run a group chat, the one place where they spoke freely, certain that the dutiful daughter would never expose them. In that chat, in their own words, they had discussed for months how to pressure me into giving up my condo. There were messages from my mother strategizing about the best moment to spring the deed on me. There were messages from Trevor laughing about how I would never say no in front of Caitlin's wealthy family. There were messages from my father saying that I owed the family and that my single life meant my property was fair game. It was all there, a written confession of a coordinated plan to take my home through public humiliation. With Marcus's careful guidance about what was lawful to share, I made the relevant portions of that group chat known to the people who needed to see them, including eventually Caitlin and her family. The effect was immediate and devastating. Caitlin, it turned out, had genuinely believed she was marrying into a warm and generous family. When she saw, in their own words, how they had schemed to strip the family workhorse of her only home for the couple's benefit, and how casually they discussed using her own wedding as the pressure point, she was horrified. Her wealthy and image-conscious parents were even more horrified to learn that the family they were about to join was the kind that defrauded their own children and ended up in court over it. Within weeks, Caitlin called off the engagement. The grand wedding my parents had been so desperate to host, the social triumph they had been counting on, simply evaporated. Trevor, the golden child who had never worked a day in his life, lost the wealthy fiancé who was supposed to be his ticket to a comfortable future, and he had no one to blame but the family that had built him into someone Caitlin could no longer respect. The lawsuit itself never even reached a full trial. Faced with the undeniable evidence, the dated transfers, the written promises, the group chat, my parents' own lawyer advised them that they would almost certainly lose. They settled. They agreed to repay me a substantial portion of the $90,000 I had spent on Trevor's education, structured over time because they did not have it all at once. It would take them years. It would mean selling things, downsizing, going without the comforts they had grown used to spending my money on. My 60-something-year-old father, who had not held a serious job in ages, had to go back to work to meet the payments. The money I clawed back, I used to pay down my own law school loans, the loans I had taken because the family that promised to fund my education had spent it all on my brother instead. I kept my condominium. I want to say that plainly. The small one-bedroom home they tried to take from me in front of 80 applauding strangers remained mine, exactly as it should have. I still live there. I've made it warm and bright and entirely my own, and every time I put my key in my own door, I remember the night I almost let them convince me I did not deserve it. A few months after the case settled, my mother appeared at my door. She did not call first. She stood in the hallway of my building, and she wept and she begged. She said that we were still family, that Trevor was devastated and alone, that I had won, and surely that was enough, and that I should find it in my heart to forgive and to help them now that they were struggling. I stood in my doorway, the doorway of the home they tried to take, and I looked at her, and I felt almost nothing but a deep and settled calm. I told her the truth. I told her that for 10 years I had given this family everything I had, my dreams, my health, my money, my youth, and that they had repaid me by trying to take the last thing I owned. I told her that I had finally learned that a promise is not love if it is only ever made to be broken, and that forgiveness without honesty is just permission to be robbed again. And then I told her gently that the answer was no and that she should go home. I closed the door, and I have not opened it to them since. It has been a little more than a year now. The wound has healed into something I can carry without it bleeding. I passed the bar exam. I am a practicing attorney now, the thing I dreamed of being since I was 9 years old, the thing they took from me and the thing I took back for myself. I work at a firm that helps ordinary people stand up to those who try to exploit them, and there is a particular fire in me when I represent someone who has been treated the way I was treated, someone who was told that their generosity made them fair game. I have built a small circle of real friends, the family I chose, people who clap for me when I succeed instead of asking what my success can do for them. And on quiet evenings in my own small home, I feel a peace I did not know was possible. Trevor is still unemployed, still living with our parents, his prestigious engagement and his easy future both gone. My parents are working to repay a debt they never imagined they would have to honor. And I, the daughter they treated as a bottomless bank account, am finally free, finally building the life they spent a decade stealing from me. I do not feel triumphant about it. I feel like a woman who finally stopped apologizing for being worth something. Living through all of this taught me a lesson I wish I had understood when I was 9 years old, dreaming of courtrooms. Counting what you are owed is not cruelty. Refusing to be robbed is not selfishness. There is a difference between generosity and self-erasure, and for most of my life I could not tell the two apart. I gave a family that loved my money everything I had, and they would have taken even my front door key if I had let them. I finally chose myself. I counted every dollar, and I asked for it back, and I let the law do the rest. But living through it has made me wonder how many of you are out there right now, folding up your own dreams and putting them in a drawer because someone promised you that your turn would come. So let me ask you honestly. I took back every single dollar I paid. I exposed what my family had done, and I let my brother's engagement fall apart in the process. Do you think I was finally claiming the justice I was owed, or do you think I went too far and was simply heartless? Tell me what you would have done in the comments below. And if my story gave you even a spark of strength today, please subscribe and turn on the bell so you can join this community where we tell the stories so many people are forced to live in silence. Thank you for being here with me tonight. You remind me that I was never truly alone.